We were newlyweds, traveling the world. Everything felt perfect. She was charming, spontaneous, and always had the next adventure planned. We'd met in Balim, wandering after quitting a job I hated. Her, mid-sabbatical, with a camera around her neck and a philosophy book in her backpack. It felt cinematic, like our lives had collided for a reason. Within 6 months we were married, our rings not even engraved yet, passports inked with every country we could afford to reach. From the beaches of Greece to the alleys of Marrakech, she led the way, laughing at every wrong turn, calling them plot twists. I loved that about her, the way she made danger feel like detour, chaos like choreography. We weren't rich, but we were rich in stories. She'd say that often, tracing the lines of my palm with her fingers. We're already legends. We rarely stayed in one place for more than a week. She kept us moving planes, night buses, dusty motorbikes. We had no itinerary, just trust. I didn't realize then that spontaneity can be a mask for something else entirely. Looking back, I wonder if she ever loved me, or just the power of being followed. She always chose the destination. I always agreed. That was our dynamic. Her, the whirlwind. Me, the anchor, trying to keep up. But I didn't mind not yet. The world was a blur of motion and mystery, and I thought we were chasing freedom together. I didn't see the signs, how she'd get quiet when I suggested somewhere familiar, how her smile froze when I asked about going home. She said the world was too big to settle, and I believed her. She kissed like she was promising something, and I didn't ask what. Every night was a new sky, and every morning a new map. I should have seen it coming, the turn. But when you're in love, you don't notice you're on a cliff's edge until the ground's already gone. We were halfway across the globe, somewhere between love and illusion. And then, out of nowhere, she pointed to a red-circled spot on the map. "Let's go here," she said. "It's not touristy at all." I didn't know it then. But that moment would change everything. She said it with the same casual certainty she used when ordering coffee or booking flights at the last minute. "Let's go here." Her finger hovered over a country I barely recognized. Its name curled in Cyrillic script, red circled on her worn map like a hidden treasure. "It's off the grid. Authentic. Untouched." She grinned. I remember how her eyes danced when she said that word, untouched, like it meant opportunity instead of risk. I Googled it, of course. Headlines popped up. Civil unrest, media lockdown, disputed borders. I asked her if she was serious. She shrugged. "The media always exaggerates. We'll be fine. No tourists means no lines." That was her logic, and I bought into it, because she'd always been right before. Because I wanted to keep being the kind of person who could follow someone like her. We crossed the border 3 days later, a dusty bus dropping us into a city where the air felt like static. Something was off. The taxi drivers didn't speak. The soldiers didn't smile. The flags on the walls weren't the ones I'd seen online. "They're just protective," she said, weaving through checkpoints like she belonged there. And I followed. Always followed. Our hotel was a crumbling Soviet-style block with no front desk, just a man with one eye and too many questions. The power flickered. The water ran yellow. But she lit a candle and called it an adventure. I told myself it was temporary. Just another story. A few days, maybe. Then back to comfort. But she unpacked her bags, like we were settling. Hung her dresses in a wardrobe with no door. Left her toothbrush by the sink. I noticed she kept mine in her backpack. "So we don't lose it," she said. I laughed, not realizing the joke was on me. She stopped using her phone. Claimed reception was bad. But I saw her scrolling once late at night, eyes lit by blue glow, thumb moving fast. "Just checking weather," she said, locking the screen. That night, she slept soundly. I didn't. There was shouting outside, distant pops that didn't sound like fireworks. And in the morning, she was already dressed. "Let's go see the market," she said. I reached for my passport. She looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "I've got it. Don't worry." And I didn't. Not yet. The airport was tense. Soldiers patrolled the terminal. I brushed off the unease as part of the authentic experience she promised. "They're just here for show," she whispered, tugging my sleeve like we were sneaking into something thrilling. I tried to match her energy, but my gut felt tight. The air was thick, humming with something I couldn't name. People moved quickly, eyes low. Uniforms were everywhere. I noticed sandbags stacked near the exits. No one smiled. At immigration, the officer took longer than usual with my passport. He flipped through the pages twice, glanced at my wife, then back at me, said something in a clipped dialect I didn't understand. She answered for us, confident, fluent. I didn't know she spoke the language. "He's with me," she said. And just like that, we were waved through. The second we stepped out, heat hit like a wall. The parking lot was half rubble. A boy offered to carry our bags for coins, but a soldier shouted, and he vanished. We found a driver, old man with hollow cheeks and cracked sunglasses. He said nothing, just held up 5 fingers. $5? I asked. She nodded, handed him 20. He didn't thank her, just started driving. The city blurred past buildings pockmarked by bullets, flags hanging like warnings, murals of martyrs I didn't recognize. At one intersection, a tank rumbled by. Its barrel pointed at nothing and everything. I looked at her. She was taking photos, smiling. "This place has layers," she said. Stories buried everywhere. Our hotel was down an alley that smelled of diesel and fire. The door creaked. The lights flickered. A man at the counter asked for our passports. She handed him mine before I could speak. "Just for check-in," she said. "Standard procedure." I nodded, unsure why my chest felt hollow. That night, I asked when we were leaving. She stretched out on the bed, arms behind her head. "Soon," she said. "Just a few days. Maybe a week. Let's feel it out." She kissed me, like it was still us against the world. I kissed her back, trying to believe it. But even then, something was shifting. Something small, something sharp, and I didn't know yet how much it would cost me. It slipped out like it was nothing. We were walking through a chaotic bazaar, the kind that smelled like diesel and cumin, when I mentioned our flight home. "Oh," she said casually, inspecting a worn necklace from a street vendor. "I only booked one-way tickets." My footsteps faltered. "What do you mean?" She didn't look up. "It's more flexible this way. We'll figure it out." Then she smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. That was the first time I felt fear. Not the kind that slams into your chest, but the slow creeping kind, the kind that taps politely before it strangles. We made our way back to the hotel. I tried to ask more, but she brushed me off. "Don't get all Western on me," she said. "The world isn't always about structure." I told myself she was right, that I was overreacting. We were travelers, adventurers. Spontaneity was part of the deal. But in the corner of my mind, a voice whispered, "You should have checked the tickets yourself." That night, I rummaged through our bags when she went to shower. No sign of my passport. Hers was in the lining of her coat, zipped and hidden. Mine was nowhere. When I asked her about it, she laughed. "You really don't trust me?" She walked over and kissed my forehead. "I'm keeping it safe. You lose things, remember?" And I did. I really did. So I nodded, heart unsure, hands still damp with doubt. The next morning, she was gone when I woke. A note on the table. Went out to explore. Be back soon. No time. No location. Just absence, and that damned smiley face she always drew. Hours passed. I walked the block, asked shopkeepers, checked cafes. No one had seen her. My phone had no signal. When she returned after sunset, she acted like nothing happened. "Found a local market. You would have loved it." She handed me a carved wooden lion. "Thought of you." I didn't ask where my passport was. I didn't ask where she really went. I told myself I was imagining it all. That love makes us paranoid sometimes. But something inside me knew we weren't just tourists anymore, and whatever she had planned, it had already started. She asked for my passport to keep it safe. We were about to head out for the day, and she said it so casually like it was just another thing she always did. I handed it over without thinking. We always watched out for each other, or so I believed. She tucked it into the inside pocket of her bag, zipped it shut, and gave me a quick smile. "One less thing to worry about," she said. "You'll thank me later." I didn't question it. Not then. We wandered the city like we were still honeymooners, ducking through markets, sipping thick coffee that tasted like earth and smoke. She held my hand. She kissed my cheek. She laughed at everything. And all the while, my passport was no longer mine. It sounds small now, just a document. But in places like that, it's your name, your rights, your proof that you exist. And I had handed mine over without a second thought. That night, I brought it up again. "You still have my passport, right?" She looked up from her book, paused, then nodded. "Of course, safe and sound." She didn't offer to show it. I didn't push. She had a way of turning questions into accusations, and I was tired of arguing. So I let it go. We fell asleep to distant thunder that wasn't thunder. The city never really slept. Sirens howled like dogs. Generators coughed into darkness. Somewhere in the building, a baby cried all night. She slept like stone. The next morning, she asked if I wanted to go to the mountains. "There's a temple. Locals say it's haunted." Her eyes lit up. She loved ghost stories. I laughed. Said maybe tomorrow. "Suit yourself," she said, grabbing her camera bag. "I'll be back before lunch." She kissed me, slung the bag over her shoulder, and walked out the door. That was the last time I saw her with both eyes open and full of love. I remember the way she didn't look back. The door clicked. The city kept humming. And I stayed there in bed, telling myself she'd be back soon. But soon came and went. And the silence she left behind only got louder. I woke up alone in the hotel. No note, no bags, no passport, just silence, and the growing sound of gunfire in the distance. The bed beside me was still warm, like she had only just left. But the room was hollow, stripped of everything that tethered me to safety. Her coat, her backpack, even her toothbrush. Gone. I checked the bathroom, the hallway, the stairs. I ran down to the lobby, barefoot and panicked. The old man behind the desk just stared at me. "Your wife?" he asked. I nodded. He shrugged. "Gone early. Taxi." That's all he said. That's all I got. I asked if she left anything for me. He shook his head. I tried to explain passport, money, phone, but he just waved me off, like I was one of many. I stumbled back to the room. The lights flickered. The floor creaked. My chest felt like it was collapsing inward. I opened drawers, flipped cushions, searched in places no one would hide anything, but I had to try. My wallet was there, but it was empty. My phone was dead. And when I plugged it in, it never turned on. It wasn't just off, it had been wiped. Like someone had reset my life and walked away with the only copy. I stood at the window and watched the street below. Tanks rolled by. Soldiers barked at pedestrians. Shops were closing. Something had shifted overnight. Something big. You could feel it in the air, like the whole country was holding its breath. I waited until sundown. No message, no knock, nothing. Just that same distant gunfire growing louder by the hour. I walked to the embassy the next day, or tried to. The roads were blocked. I was stopped twice by men in uniforms I didn't recognize. When they asked for ID, I had none. When they asked where I was from, I hesitated. "Tourist," I said. But I didn't feel like one anymore. I felt like a ghost wearing someone else's name. I returned to the hotel. The desk clerk was gone. The lobby empty. That night, I lay awake and counted every moment I missed, every warning I ignored. She hadn't just left. She had erased me. And I had no way home. The city erupted. Riots, martial law, airport shut down. And I was a foreigner, without ID, stranded in a country spiraling into chaos. It started with a blackout, then sirens. Then the sky cracked open with smoke and fire. At first, I thought it was just another protest. Then I heard gunfire in the streets below. Real gunfire. Not distant this time. Not background noise. It echoed through the walls like a warning. From the hotel window, I watched columns of people running, shouting, scattering. Tires burned at intersections. Roadblocks popped up overnight. The air was thick with tear gas and rage. And me? I was just a man with no name, no phone, no plan. Just a stale room key and a face no one recognized. I packed what little I had. A water bottle, the last of my cash, a translation phrasebook that felt more useless by the minute. I wrapped my feet with socks and duct tape, shoved them into worn shoes, and made for the street. Everyone I passed looked away. I was the outsider now, the one who didn't belong. I reached the airport gates by noon. They were shut, guarded by soldiers with dead eyes and twitching fingers. No flights in, no flights out. "Go back," one of them barked, nudging my chest with the barrel of a rifle. I raised my hands, tried to explain. No one listened. I asked about the embassy. He pointed down the highway and turned his back. That night, I slept in a stairwell behind a shuttered grocery store. Dogs fought in the alley beside me. My hands shook with adrenaline and hunger. I dreamt of her standing in the terminal, waving goodbye while I screamed her name behind locked glass. The next morning, I walked. I didn't know the streets. I didn't speak the language, but I walked. Past checkpoints, past looted shops, past men dragging bodies I tried not to look at. The embassy was across the river, a squat concrete building surrounded by tall gates and flags that looked like lies. I thought getting there would save me. I thought they'd open the doors and say, "We've been looking for you." But when I finally arrived, sweating, bruised, half mad from the heat, all I got was a clipboard and a question I didn't know how to answer. "Do you have identification?" I made it to my country's embassy, only to be told my passport was flagged as intentionally retained by spouse. I couldn't believe it. The man behind the glass didn't even blink when he said it. Just read the screen, tapped a few keys, and looked up like he was confirming a grocery order. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "Until this is resolved, we can't issue a replacement." I pressed both palms to the glass. "She took it. I didn't give it to her. She left me here." He gave a rehearsed frown, like sympathy learned from a manual. "Do you have any proof?" I wanted to scream. "Proof? What proof do you carry when you trust someone completely? When you sleep next to them and hand them your identity like it's love?" I had nothing. No footage, no signature, just my word. And in that moment, it wasn't enough. He told me to wait in the lobby. I sat there for 4 hours. No one came. A new shift took over. A woman at the desk handed me a list of local shelters, printed on paper that smelled like dust. "You'll be contacted if anything changes," she said. "Try to stay safe." That was it. No phone. No contact. No help. I wasn't just denied, I was erased. I walked out the embassy gates and stood on the curb as tanks rolled by like thunderclouds. The air was hot with smoke. I watched people pass by and realized I was no longer one of them. I was a man without a country, without a wife, without a name the system recognized. I thought embassies were sanctuaries, that if you reached the flag of your homeland, you'd be protected. But I wasn't. Not when the system thought I had given her permission. Somewhere, in some database, there was a note beside my name. Flagged. Voluntary. Suspicious. I didn't know what to do. I walked for hours. Through markets that no longer sold anything. Past billboards spray-painted black. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every face looked like a mirror of my fear. I found a broken bench and sat down, listening to the city collapse around me. I had no idea where she was. No idea why she did this. All I knew was this. The person I trusted most had locked the door behind her and left me in a burning house. I hacked into our shared email account. A draft email to her sister read, "He deserves this. Let him see what it's like to be abandoned." I stared at the screen for a long time, not blinking, not breathing, just reading that one sentence over and over until the words blurred. It wasn't even sent. She had just typed it, then left it there like a trophy, like a confession she didn't feel the need to hide. I'd used an old password we created during our second month together. The name of our favorite coffee shop. At the time, it felt romantic. Now, it felt like the punchline to a joke I never got to hear. The inbox was quiet. Nothing recent. But in the drafts, I found more. Messages to friends, one-liners, half-finished thoughts, things she never meant for me to see. Or maybe she did. Maybe she wanted this to hurt. One message read, "He's too soft, always needing validation, like dragging around a broken wing." Another, "I could have done better, but I didn't want better. I wanted obedient." And then, buried deeper, "This country will break him. I want to watch him unravel." I felt sick. My hands trembled over the keyboard. I didn't recognize the woman who wrote those things. But maybe I never had. Maybe the version of her I loved was a costume. One she wore until I stopped applauding. I checked her sent folder. Nothing since she left. But her sister had replied to one message weeks ago. "You sure he won't make it back?" To which she had simply written, "He doesn't have it in him." That was the end of the thread. I closed the browser, heart pounding like a siren in my chest. It wasn't just abandonment, it was calculated. It was deliberate. This wasn't about getting lost. This was about being erased. And now, I couldn't pretend anymore. Not about her. Not about us. She hadn't made a mistake. She'd made a choice. And I was the one who had to live with it. I started piecing things together, her controlling moments, the gaslighting, the fights she always twisted to make me the villain. It was like watching the movie of your life with the sound turned up. Suddenly hearing everything you missed the first time. The way she'd say, "You're imagining things," when I'd catch her texting someone late at night, or how she'd cry if I questioned her, then accuse me of not being supportive. There were so many little red flags I had folded into origami excuses. I remember once, back in Istanbul, I lost our hotel key. She didn't get mad, she went silent. For hours. Just walked 5 feet ahead of me like I was a stranger. That was her power. Silence. Withdrawal. Withholding affection like it was a currency I had to earn. She called it boundaries. I called it love. But it wasn't either. It was control. I saw it in hindsight, in fragments. The way she'd take my phone to check the time, then hold on to it for the rest of the night. How she never let me book anything always. Her name on the tickets, her card, her plan. I thought it was romance, that she was taking care of me. Now I realized she was eliminating my exits. Slowly. Carefully. Like caging a bird with invisible bars. Even the way she loved me had conditions. When I was fun, agreeable, easy, she adored me. But when I had opinions, doubts, or fears, she'd shift. Cold. Dismissive. "Why do you always ruin the vibe?" she'd say. Or worse, "You're lucky I put up with this." I didn't see it then, how she chipped away at me until I second-guessed my own thoughts, until I apologized for things she did, until I thanked her for staying, after fights she started. It wasn't one moment. It was a million small cuts. And now, stranded and alone, I finally bled enough to see the truth. She never wanted a partner. She wanted a mirror. Something that reflected her without distortion. And when I stopped doing that, when I started showing cracks, she decided to smash the whole thing and leave the pieces where no one could find them. But I found them. All of them. And I wasn't going to forget again. To survive, I turned to locals and backpackers. Someone mentioned a man who could forge documents if you were willing to pay or trade. His name was whispered in corners, never said out loud near officials. "He works near the Southern Bridge," a street vendor told me, slipping the words between bites of grilled meat. "Don't look scared when you ask for him." I nodded like I knew what I was doing. I didn't. I spent 3 days combing alleyways and ruined blocks, asking coded questions to people who wouldn't make eye contact. Finally, a woman in a teal scarf handed me a note scribbled on napkin paper. It had a name. No address. Just a symbol that looked like a crescent moon wrapped around a dagger. "Show him this," she said, "and bring cash." I didn't have much left. A few crumpled bills and a watch I had hidden in my sock. It had been a gift from my brother. Now it was my only currency. I found the man on the 4th night. He sat behind a tarp-covered stall selling bootleg cigarettes and cracked phone chargers. He didn't ask how I found him, just stared at the napkin, then at me. "Passport?" he asked. I nodded. "American." He held out his hand. 3 days. $200. I gave him everything, even the watch. He slid it into his pocket without a word. "You'll sleep here," he said, nodding toward a mattress behind his stall. "Don't leave. Too dangerous for you." I spent the night listening to rats fight under crates and people shout in a language I still didn't know. I thought of home. Not my apartment or my family, but the idea of safety. A place where I existed, where someone would notice if I disappeared. In the morning, he brought me stale bread and bottled water. 3 days, he reminded me. I nodded. Hope bloomed just enough to hurt. For the first time since she left, I believed I might get out. I even allowed myself to imagine the plane, the airport, the moment I walked through customs with a name again. But the city doesn't forgive fools. And by the 3rd day, I would learn that hope can be a weapon in the wrong hands. The forger took my money and vanished. Left me sleeping in an alley, hoping no one would mistake me for an enemy. I waited until nightfall on the 3rd day. My backpack hugged to my chest, like it might contain more than a crushed water bottle and a half-eaten protein bar. He didn't come. The stall was still there but stripped. No tarp, no crates, no mattress. Just an oil stain where his chair used to be. I asked around, flashing the symbol on the napkin. No one looked twice. One man laughed. "You gave him money?" Another just shook his head. Tourists always learn the hard way. My stomach turned. Not from hunger this time, but from shame. I'd believed him. I'd believed he was different. That he was a crack in the wall I could squeeze through. But he was just another closed door. I wandered the district until I found a side alley with 2 walls and a rusted metal dumpster. It smelled like old onions and smoke, but it was dry. I curled up behind it, heart thudding loud enough to drown out the gunfire. I had no idea what side of the city I was on anymore. The map in my head was gone, and all I could think about was how she probably knew. Knew how hard it would be to leave. Knew someone like me would search for hope in dirty corners. That I'd give what little I had to someone promising freedom. The moon was high when footsteps scraped near me. My breath caught. A figure approached slowly, limping. I tensed, but they passed. Just a man. Just another ghost in a city full of the forgotten. I didn't sleep. Just drifted in and out, eyes open, waiting for the sky to change. At dawn, I moved. I couldn't stay in one place anymore. Not when it was this easy to be erased. My face felt swollen. My hands were raw from the concrete. But worse was the weight in my chest, realizing I had nothing left to trade. No money, no name, no faith in people. She didn't just leave me. She carved out the part of me that trusted, and in its place, she left silence. Cold, echoing, endless silence. I swapped clothes with a fleeing merchant, took a scarf and fake ID, pretended to be someone else. Anything to get to the border. It happened fast. I found him crouched behind a burned-out van, panting like an animal hunted too long. His face was streaked with ash. His hands clutched a tattered satchel, like it contained his whole life. He didn't speak English. I didn't speak his language. But desperation doesn't need translation. I pointed to his jacket, then to mine, raised my arms. No threat, just trade. He stared at me, trembling. Then, slowly, he nodded. We stripped in silence, crouched in shadows. I handed him my clothes, foreign brands. Too clean, too obvious. He handed me his. A stained tunic, sandals barely held together with twine, and a scarf that smelled of sweat and dust. At the bottom of his satchel, he pulled out an ID. Fake. Laminated. The edges curled. The name wasn't mine, but the face was close enough. He held it up between us like a prayer. I took it, pressed my palm to his chest in thanks. He didn't smile, just ran. I wrapped the scarf around my face and moved. Head low, gait changed, eyes always scanning. There were checkpoints ahead, patrols that didn't hesitate. People disappeared for less than bad paperwork. I practiced my new name in my head, said it over and over until it felt almost real. The city was crumbling by then. You could feel it in the bones of buildings, in the way people moved fast, quiet, afraid to be noticed. Smoke hung in the air like permanent weather. I joined a group of refugees heading toward the southern edge. No one asked who I was. Everyone was pretending. That's what survival is, sometimes one long, convincing lie. We walked for hours, then days. I rationed the little I had left, traded a button for water, half a broken pen for a strip of jerky. I told myself this was the last stretch. Just get to the border. Just get out. Just make it one more day. But my body wasn't listening anymore. My legs buckled before the sun went down. I collapsed near a dried-out creek bed. The last thing I remember was the sound of sandals in dirt, then hands, then darkness. A local family found me half-conscious and fed me. The mother told me her own son had been taken. We didn't speak the same language, but grief has a dialect. They lived in a clay-walled hut behind a collapsed orchard. Chickens wandered through holes in the walls. The smell of mint tea and burned rice filled the air. I woke up under a woven blanket, mouth dry, skin hot. She sat beside me with a bowl of broth, whispering something soft over and over. The man, her husband, I assumed watched from the doorway with wary eyes and a rusted blade on his belt. He didn't trust me. I didn't blame him, but she did. Somehow, she cupped the back of my head and fed me slow, like I was her own. Every gesture said, "You're safe here. For now." I tried to speak. My voice cracked. "Thank you." She didn't understand the words, but the tone landed. She nodded once, eyes glistening. Later, she showed me a photograph, a teenage boy with wild hair and a lopsided grin. Her son, gone, taken by soldiers, or maybe just the war itself. She didn't need to explain. Her eyes carried the story, and mine replied. We didn't speak, but we understood. Pain makes its own language. That night, I helped them tend the fire. The man handed me a knife to peel potatoes. A test, maybe, or a gesture. Either way, I passed. We sat in silence as the fire popped and the night echoed with distant sirens. They gave me a corner of the hut to sleep in. The roof leaked. The floor was dirt, but it was more safety than I'd felt in weeks. Before sleep took me, the woman tucked the scarf tighter around my neck, like a mother, like someone who didn't need a reason. In the morning, she packed me bread and filled a bottle with boiled water. She didn't ask where I was going, just pressed the photo of her son into my hand and nodded. I didn't understand what she said as I left, but I felt it, something between blessing and plea. I was still nobody, still lost. But for one night, I was a son again, and for one night, that was enough. Whispers of a humanitarian convoy spread. It was a dangerous journey through hostile territory, but it was my only hope. Word came from a teenage boy selling scrap metal by the road. He leaned in close, whispered like he was sharing a ghost story. "They're moving people south," he said. "White trucks, blue flags, no guns." I asked where. He pointed to the horizon, to the mountains shrouded in heat and ash. 2 days' walk, maybe 3. It sounded like a lie. Everything did by then. But lies and hope start to look the same when you've run out of options. I returned to the hut, showed the boys direction to the family. The father shook his head, made a slicing motion across his throat. Too risky. Too many soldiers. Too many landmines. But the mother looked at me, then at the photo of her son still clutched in my pack. She touched my hand, then nodded. I left at dawn. A loaf of bread, the scarf, the fake ID, and the memory of being wanted. The roads were gone. Only broken trails remained, scorched earth marked by tank tread and shattered glass. I followed the sun, used the stars when I could, slept in ditches, drank from streams and puddles. Every noise sent my heart into my throat. Helicopters, gunshots, screams too far away to help, but too close to ignore. On the second night, I found others. 5 of them, all walking like I was. Hollow eyes, scabbed lips, hope stitched together with threadbare shoes. No one asked names. There was no point. You don't need names when you're all ghosts. Someone said the convoy left every 3 days. Someone else said they'd been ambushed last week. I didn't care anymore. Even if it was a trap, it was better than staying still. We moved with the wind, low to the ground, silent as the dead. Every hour felt like a gamble. But the farther we went, the more real it became. And by the time we reached the base of the hills, I saw them white trucks, faded blue markings. A line of people too thin to stand, too scared to speak. But they were there, waiting, just like me. We moved at night. Airstrikes lit up the hills. I saw things I'll never unsee, and somehow I survived the crossing. The convoy didn't wait for daylight. They moved under cover of dark, headlights off, engines low. There were only 3 trucks, each packed with the silence of people who had nothing left. We weren't passengers. We were cargo. I climbed into the second truck, wedged between a woman with bandaged feet and a man who didn't blink once the entire ride. The driver didn't speak, just gripped the wheel like it might betray him. I could hear the distant thud of artillery, could smell the smoke through the metal walls. Every mile we drove felt like another borrowed breath. I counted them in my head, just to stay conscious. 47, 48, 49. Then the road curved and everything went white. A flash, then thunder, then screams. The truck swerved. People fell into each other like dominoes. Someone shouted a prayer. The driver cursed, swerved again, and kept going. We didn't stop. We couldn't. The man beside me was bleeding from his shoulder. He didn't notice. I pressed a cloth to it anyway. Not because it would help, just to pretend we still could. Hours passed like that, breathless, blind. The smoke was so thick, we couldn't see 5 feet ahead. We passed burned-out cars, collapsed bridges, what looked like a mass grave. No one spoke of it. You learn quickly not to name the horrors. It gives them power. Eventually, the hills opened up. There was a clearing, a checkpoint with flashlights and barking dogs. I braced myself. This was where we'd be turned away. Where someone would point to my face, to my fake ID, and say, "Not him." But they didn't. A woman in a vest waved us through. Her eyes barely touched us. We weren't people. We were numbers. Statistics. Shadows passing through. And somehow, that was enough. The sun was rising as we crossed into the zone they called neutral. It didn't feel safe. It didn't feel real, but it was quiet. And for the first time in weeks, I breathed without flinching. My legs buckled when I stepped off the truck. The woman with the bandaged feet caught me, said nothing, just held me up until I could stand again. I arrived in a refugee camp as stateless. They logged me as unknown, unclaimed. For the first time, I had no name that mattered. Just a number printed on a wristband and a clipboard passed from tent to tent. A language I couldn't speak asked me questions I didn't understand. I answered with shrugs, hand signals, silence. They wrote something down anyway, then moved on. The camp sat at the edge of a no-man's land, rows of white tarps and gravel paths, bordered by fences too low to stop anything real. The air smelled like sweat, boiled rice, and burnt rubber. There were lines for food, lines for water, lines to prove you still existed. I stood in them all. Each step forward felt like a victory, even when the rice ran out or the pump went dry. At night, the tents echoed with coughing and crying. Babies shrieked. Old men moaned in their sleep. And sometimes, silence would fall like a blanket heavy. Final when someone simply didn't wake up. I slept next to a fence, my bag under my head, the scarf still around my neck. It had become part of me. A relic, a shield, a reminder. I didn't talk much, didn't want to. Most of us were just shadows trying to stay out of the wind. I was no different. I didn't ask for help. Didn't tell anyone who I was or where I'd come from. What was the point? The man I used to be didn't matter anymore. He had been left behind in another country, another life, another body. One night, a little girl passed me a scrap of flatbread. No words, just a gesture. Her mother nodded at me. A flicker of recognition, of pity, maybe, or kinship. We were all the same here, all erased in different ways. After a week, I went to the registration tent to ask if anyone had called for me. I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear it. The woman at the desk shook her head. "No records," she said. "No one's looking." It didn't hurt. Not anymore. It just confirmed what I already knew. I didn't exist. Not to the system. Not to her. Not to the life I used to cling to. I was gone. And in this place, that made me normal. A UN worker offered to help. He gave me a nickname, then helped me rebuild a digital identity from scraps. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with a badge clipped to his collar and tired eyes that didn't match his age. He found me near the food line, sitting with my back against a fence. "You got a name?" he asked. I hesitated. Too long. "All right," he said, pulling a small tablet from his bag. "We'll call you Micah. Sound okay?" I nodded. It wasn't mine, but it would do. He typed it in like it meant something, like it gave me weight. "You got any ID?" he asked. I showed him the fake one. He tilted his head. "Close enough." Over the next few days, he found ways to plug me back into the world. A temporary refugee ID, a digital profile, a photo snapped against a tarp wall with bad lighting and tired posture. Suddenly, I had a barcode, a case file, a place in the system. It wasn't freedom, but it was form, and in places like this, form meant survival. "Where are you from?" he asked once. I didn't answer. He didn't press. Maybe he saw it in my face, the layers of loss, the erosion of trust. Instead, he said, "I've met 100 guys like you. They all think they're invisible. You're not." I didn't believe him, but I appreciated the lie. He printed my new ID and handed it to me like it was sacred. Micah, it read. Male. Estimated age, 30. Status, under review. That last part made me laugh. Everything about me was under review. I kept the card in my pocket like it was gold. Showed it at checkpoints. Used it to get food, soap, a second blanket. It worked. People called me Micah now. Volunteers, children, even myself sometimes. I whispered it at night, just to hear something stick. It wasn't who I was, but it was something. That worker, his name was Nabil, checked on me every day. Never asked too much. Just brought water, a biscuit, once even a small book of poems in translation. He didn't try to save me. He just reminded me I was still here, still breathing, still part of something. And sometimes, that's enough. I found internet access. My wife had returned home, sold our apartment, and was posting beach selfies as if I never existed. It happened in a corner of the camp, near the medical tent, where a solar-powered Wi-Fi terminal blinked weakly into life every few hours. People lined up for minutes of connection, short bursts of the outside world. When it was my turn, I didn't even know where to start. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, rusty from silence. I opened a browser, typed her name. Her profile still existed. The same bio, the same smile, but the world around her had changed. There were photos clear, vibrant, curated like nothing had ever gone wrong. Her standing in front of a sunrise with a glass of wine, her laughing on a boat, her sitting poolside with friends I didn't recognize, and always, always alone. No mention of me, no trace. It was like I'd been edited out, like I was a typo she had finally corrected. I clicked through every image, looking for something that wasn't there. A clue, a flicker, a sign of guilt, but she looked radiant, free, like she had won. One post was dated just a week after I'd vanished. Captioned, "New chapter." Another had comments. A few people asked where I was. She didn't answer, just heart reacted to emojis and compliments. My stomach turned. I checked the real estate listings. Our apartment had sold, quickly, below market value. She'd wasted no time. Even our wedding photos were gone. I opened our old email account. She hadn't changed the password. The inbox was quiet. Promotions, receipts, nothing personal. I checked the trash. Nothing recent. She hadn't even looked. I wasn't a ghost to her. I was less than that. I was nothing. I stared at the screen until the timer on the terminal blinked red. My session ending. 1 minute left. My hands shook as I opened a new email. To her address. The same one I'd used to send anniversary plans. Love notes, grocery lists. I typed slowly. One line, one truth, one wound she couldn't ignore. Then I hit send. The timer expired. The signal dropped. And I sat there, staring into the blue light of a world that had moved on without me. I emailed her, just one line. "I'm alive, and I know what you did." No reply, but she read it. The read receipt stung more than a response ever could. It came back an hour later, opened, viewed, marked as seen, and then silence. No typing bubble, no apology, not even anger, just acknowledgement. She saw me, and chose not to answer. That small notification hit harder than any insult. It meant she knew. It meant she wasn't surprised. I reread the message 10 times. It didn't need more. Just those words. Just proof that I wasn't buried in the desert. That her plan hadn't fully worked. I wanted to believe it would shake her. That it would land like thunder. But people like her don't flinch. They pivot. They pretend. They adjust the narrative. I imagined her seeing the message pop up on her screen. Her mouth tightening. Her eyes narrowing. Then closing the tab. Deleting the app. Moving on. I didn't want a conversation. I didn't want closure. I wanted her to live with it. The knowledge that I was still out there. Still breathing. Still remembering. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sky above the camp was heavy with clouds. Thunder in the distance, like a war still chasing me. I lay on my cot and pictured her alone in our bidif. She still had it. I wondered if she slept soundly or stared at the ceiling, haunted by what she'd done. Maybe she didn't care. Maybe she'd convinced herself I deserved it. Or maybe she thought I'd died long ago, and this was just the last echo of a voice she'd silenced. I opened the email again, just to look. The timestamp glared back at me. She had read it exactly 13 minutes after it was sent. Fast. Too fast. Like she'd been waiting. Like she knew I might crawl back into her world somehow. I closed my eyes and tried to let it go. But some wounds aren't meant to scab over. They stay open. Stay raw. Not because you want them to, but because they're proof you survived. That next morning, I didn't check again. I didn't send a follow-up. I didn't need to. She read it. That's all I ever wanted. That's all she'll ever get. I worked menial jobs at the border, dug trenches, cleaned tents. I was learning to survive, but more importantly, I was learning to live. No one knew who I used to be. No one cared. And for the first time, that felt like freedom. The work was hard. Blisters formed, burst, healed, and came back again. I carried crates of medical supplies, hauled water, picked up trash that blew through the camp like confetti from a ruined parade. Every job was temporary. Every task, a step forward. And I took them all. I didn't have a title. Didn't need one. People began to nod when I passed. The other workers started handing me tools without asking. A man they once ignored now had weight. Not because of who I was, but because I showed up. Every day. Quiet. Steady. The days bled together. Sunrises came early. Nights fell fast. But in between, there was rhythm. A kind of peace in repetition. And slowly, without realizing it, I began to build something. I found a corner of the camp where I could sit alone. A quiet spot behind the storage units, where the wind didn't howl so loudly. I'd eat my bread there, drink tea, breathe. Sometimes Nabil would join me. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We'd watch the clouds drift past the barbed wire and pretend they were just clouds, not smoke, not warning signs, just sky. I learned people's names, their scars, their laughter. I helped fix a broken wheelbarrow, repaired a leaking pipe. Little things. Things that reminded me I still had use, that I wasn't a broken man forever. One morning, a woman I'd seen often, one of the medical workers, handed me a towel. "You've earned a real shower," she said with a half smile. I thanked her. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Standing under warm water, scrubbing weeks of grime from my skin, I felt like I was washing away pieces of the past. Not erasing them, just finally letting them settle. I wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. But I was here. Alive. And that counted for something. I was no longer waiting to be rescued. I was learning how to begin again. The refugee family who once sheltered me became more than friends. They gave me something my wife never could. Genuine trust. I hadn't seen them since the night I left for the convoy. I assumed they'd moved on, relocated. Scattered, like so many others. But then one afternoon, while unloading supply crates near the southern checkpoint, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in weeks. A soft hum. A melody I didn't understand, but remembered. I turned. The mother stood there, scarf wrapped tightly, holding a new bundle of supplies. She saw me. Her eyes widened. Then she smiled. It was small, gentle, but it held something I hadn't felt in a long time. Recognition. She walked over slowly, as if afraid I might vanish again. I bowed slightly, unsure of what to say. She didn't say anything, just reached into her satchel and pulled out the photo, the one of her son. She pressed it into my palm again, like a ritual, then touched her chest, then mine. Family. That's what she meant. Not by blood, not by law, but by something deeper. I followed her to their new tent, now on the quieter side of the camp. Her husband sat outside, sharpening a blade. He looked up. For a moment, we stared at each other. Then he nodded once. Just once. That was enough. The little girl ran to me, laughing. She had grown taller, her laugh louder. She handed me a cracked plastic bracelet and pointed to my wrist. I wore it all day. That night, they shared their food. We ate on the floor, hands brushing over shared bread and lentils. We didn't need words. We never did. I helped repair the fabric of their tent, cleaned their water jug, fixed the latch on their door. Small things, but they mattered. I wasn't just passing through anymore. I was part of their rhythm now, and they were part of mine. One evening, the mother placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered something. I didn't catch it, but her tone said enough. I belonged. For all the years I had spent chasing approval, I never realized how simple real trust could feel. It didn't shout. It didn't demand. It stayed. Quiet. Constant. Unshakable. I began telling my story online under an alias. The posts went viral. People wanted to know what happened. Some didn't believe me. Others said it saved them. It started small. A message board. A forum for people who had been betrayed, lost, or left behind. I posted late at night, fingers trembling over the keyboard. I called myself Ashwalker. I didn't mention the country. Didn't use names, but I told the truth. I wrote about the airport, the hotel, the scarf, the fake ID. I wrote about her, not as my wife, but as the storm that swallowed me whole. The first post was long, messy, raw. I hit publish and closed the browser. Didn't expect anyone to care. The next day, there were comments. Dozens, then hundreds. People asking questions. People telling me they'd been through the same. A woman who said her fiancé abandoned her abroad. A man whose brother vanished in a war zone. Survivors. All of them. Tied together by scars. Some accused me of lying. Too cinematic, they said. Reads like fiction. I didn't argue. I didn't have to. Others stepped in. Even if it's fake. One comment read, "It's real for me." I kept posting. Chapter by chapter. Memory by memory. The site moderators messaged me, asked if I'd do an interview. I declined. I wasn't ready to be known again. Not by face, not by name, but I kept writing, kept showing up in that little digital space where ghosts told stories. It became a ritual. Each post a stone laid on a path back to myself. Then one day, something shifted. The posts were shared outside the forum, screenshotted, reposted, tweeted, blogged. Man left in war zone by wife tells his story. Headlines without a name, but people connected the dots. Someone called it modern exile. Someone else called it emotional assassination. I didn't correct them. I just kept typing. My inbox flooded. Some sent thank you letters. Others sent stories darker than mine. I read them all. I responded when I could. I believe you, I wrote back. Always that. Because I knew what it felt like not to be believed. I had lived in that silence, drowned in it. Now, I was making noise. Quiet, honest noise. And people were listening. My story caught media attention. A journalist traced the clues and connected her name. Her employer fired her. Her friends turned. I hadn't planned for that. I wasn't seeking revenge. I only wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside my head. But once the thread unraveled, people pulled. A writer from an independent news site emailed me. Said she'd been following the story. Said some of the details lined up with an old social post her team had archived. One image. My wife. On a boat. Date-stamped days after I'd vanished. Champagne in hand. Smile too wide. Background blurred. But the metadata wasn't. Location. Safe. Secure. Too secure for someone who claimed to be in danger. The journalist asked me if I wanted to go public. I told her no. She respected that. But she didn't stop. Her article went live 3 days later. My name wasn't in it, but hers was. Full. Bold. Unmistakable. Wellness influencer accused of abandoning husband in active conflict zone. The story caught fire. Comments exploded. People dragged up old photos, tweets, vacation videos. They found the sale listing for our apartment. The timeline. The silence. It was all there. She denied everything. Posted a statement. Said it was a coordinated smear campaign by an emotionally unstable ex. But the damage was done. Her brand deals vanished. Her sponsors pulled out. The self-help podcast went dark. Her friends stopped tagging her. She deleted her accounts one by one. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like gravity. Like something that had always been falling finally hit the ground. Nabil found me that night. Held out his phone. "You've seen this?" I nodded. "You okay?" I wasn't. Not really. But I said, "Yeah." He didn't push. Just sat beside me in silence. We watched the sun set over the fence line. The sky bruised and golden. Somewhere out there, she was watching it all crumble. I wondered if she regretted it. If she remembered the man she left behind. If she ever thought I'd make it out. The truth is, she probably didn't care. But now, the world knew. Not just my story, but hers too. And for the first time since she walked away, I didn't feel invisible. I felt real. She emailed me again. This time it wasn't anger. Just 6 words. I didn't think you'd survive. I never replied. It landed in my inbox like a stone dropped in still water. No greeting. No name. No explanation. Just that one sentence simple, stark, brutal in its honesty. I read it 3 times, then a 4th. Each time, it cut deeper. There was no apology in it. No remorse. Just surprise. Like my survival had ruined her plan. Like my continued existence was an inconvenience. I imagined her writing it. Maybe late at night. Maybe with a glass of wine in her hand. Maybe shaking. Maybe not. Maybe she meant it as a confession. Maybe she meant it as a warning. I'd waited so long for a message like that. Not that exact one, but something. Something that acknowledged the wound. That gave shape to the silence. But when it finally came, it didn't feel like closure. It felt like confirmation. She had left me to die. And she didn't expect me to crawl back out of the grave. I closed the laptop, walked outside. The camp was quiet. Smoke rose from a cooking fire nearby. Children laughed in the distance. Life continued, the way it always does when the world doesn't stop for your pain. I sat down beside the fence and stared at the hills. I didn't cry, didn't scream, just breathed. Let the words echo and fade. I never replied. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I finally didn't need to. Her words couldn't reach me anymore. I wasn't the man she abandoned. I wasn't broken. I wasn't hers. That email was her last attempt to reclaim the narrative. To remind me, she had power once, but that power was gone. Burned up in the dust and heat and silence of everything she left behind. I let the email sit there, unanswered, like a tombstone, like a scar. I never deleted it. I didn't need to erase it. Just like I didn't need to forgive her. Survival had already done that part for me. And in the end, her 6 words told me everything I needed to know. She never saw me as someone who could endure, but I did. I could have gone back, pressed charges, exposed her further, but I didn't. I let her live with what she did. The law might have listened. The media definitely would have. After the article, there were messages, lawyers, activists, people hungry to take the next step for me. We can sue. You have a case. You deserve justice. And maybe I did. But justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about peace. And I finally had that. I thought about what it would mean to sit in a courtroom, to recount every detail, to relive every bruise, every betrayal, to look her in the eye and know she still wouldn't flinch. What would I gain from that? A settlement? A headline? A footnote in her public downfall? No, that wasn't my story anymore. She didn't deserve another chapter. I walked the dirt paths of the camp, now familiar like old streets. I taught the little girl how to write her name in the sand. I helped build new tents. I repaired torn tarps. Life was small, but it was mine. She couldn't take that. Not anymore. Nabal asked me once, "Would you go back if the world reset?" I shook my head. I already did. He smiled at that. Said nothing else. He understood. Everyone here did. We were all survivors of something. War, betrayal, silence. My silence wasn't weakness. It was choice, power. I didn't need a courtroom to prove what she did. She knew. And that knowledge would follow her into every room she walked into from now on. Every mirror, every quiet moment. That was enough. One evening, I burned the old scarf, the one I'd worn since the alley. I stood alone behind the tents and watched it curl into ash. I didn't cry. I didn't say goodbye. It had served its purpose. It had kept me hidden, kept me alive, but I wasn't hiding anymore. I walked back through the camp with clean hands, lighter somehow, freer. I'd been left for dead, forgotten, but I rose. And I stayed risen, not through revenge, not through noise, but through the quiet, persistent act of living. And in the end, Silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. The war zone had become my home. I started teaching English, helping others navigate a world I once feared. I was no longer lost. It began with one boy, barely 10, wide eyes, no shoes. He pointed at my notebook and said a word in his language I didn't understand. I pointed back and said, "Book." He repeated it, smiled. That was the first time I saw something grow again. From then on, they kept coming. Children first, then teens, then their parents, curious but cautious. I found an old whiteboard near the medical tent, cleaned it, propped it up against a wall. I wrote the alphabet in thick, clumsy lines. A girl corrected me. I laughed. They laughed back. The lessons were never formal, just moments, shared time, shared effort. I taught them how to say their names, how to ask for food, how to say, "I am here." That one mattered most. I am here. We said it often, like a pledge, like proof. Word by word, we built something. Language became a rope thrown across the rubble. It pulled us together. It gave shape to our pain. And in teaching them, I learned too. Patience, grace, presence. I stopped thinking about escape, about borders, about what I had lost. I started thinking about what I was becoming. One evening, after class, the mother from the family that saved me handed me a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside, a handmade notebook, pages stitched together. "For your teaching," she said in broken English. I held it like it was gold. That night, I wrote a new sentence on the first page. This is the life I chose. It wasn't the one I planned. But it was mine. I had found purpose in the ruins, roots in scorched earth. I was no longer a victim of what she did. I was the architect of what came next. People stopped calling me Micah. They called me teacher now. And every time I heard it, I stood a little taller. The war still raged on beyond the camp. But inside, something was healing. Not just in me, in all of us. We weren't waiting anymore. We were building. And in that building, I became real again. A third country offered me asylum, not as a refugee but as someone who had rebuilt something valuable from nothing. The letter came in a yellow envelope. Official. Unmarked. I almost didn't open it. I'd grown used to bureaucracy, meaning bad news, more waiting, more questions. But this one was different. It came from a small nation I'd never set foot in, known for taking in the displaced, the lost, the unrooted. Inside was a single page, translated in my language. We have reviewed your case. Your work in the refugee camp has come to our attention. We offer you a home, not as charity, but as recognition. I read it twice, then 3 times. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. It wasn't about papers. It wasn't about borders. It was about being seen for who I had become, who I was forced to be. I showed the letter to Nabil. He grinned, clapped my back. "You deserve this," he said. I didn't know what to say. For so long, I'd lived in the in-between, stateless, voiceless, drifting. Now, someone wanted me. For what I did, for what I gave. They offered housing, work, a path to citizenship, a fresh start, a new name if I wanted it. But I didn't. I'd keep the one they gave me here. The one that rose from ashes. Micah, the man who stayed. I walked to the edge of the camp that night, looked out at the hills that had once trapped me. Now they looked smaller, less menacing. I thought about the ones who never made it, the ones who disappeared, and I whispered a thank you to the dirt beneath my feet. It had held me when no one else did. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I was stepping forward, into a place I had never seen, with the weight of everything I had survived stitched into every footstep. No parade, no banner, just quiet resolve. I didn't know if it would feel like home, but I knew I could build one, because I had already done it once with nothing. I had become a citizen of nowhere, and somehow, that made me belong everywhere. Not to my home country, Not to her. Not to the life that once defined me. I had died in that war zone, and someone better came out. There was no pull to return, no curiosity, just distance. Intentional and permanent. I didn't check in on old friends. I didn't try to reclaim what was taken, because what was taken no longer belonged to the man I became. That old life, the apartment, the routines, the version of love that felt more like performance than partnership, had crumbled. And in its ruins, I found something far more real. I thought closure would come through confrontation, through a trial, through justice. But instead, it came through stillness, through not looking back. Through choosing to build forward instead of digging through ashes, I became a citizen of my own choices, of quiet mornings, of shared meals, of teaching words to children who had none. I didn't need to prove anything to her, or to the world that once asked me to be smaller, quieter, easier to control. I had already done the impossible. I had returned from where no one thought I could. And not just returned. I had grown. I had stayed. I had helped others rise. One day, I received a letter from an old coworker, someone who didn't know the full story, just fragments. "You should come home," it said. "People are asking." But I didn't answer, because I was home, in a place without walls, in a life rebuilt from breath and purpose. The people who mattered now weren't in that old world. They were resilient, weathered, real. They called me teacher. They called me brother. They called me friend. And no one ever asked who I used to be. They only cared about who I was now. The truth is, I never went back, because there was nothing to go back to. Only ghosts. Only echoes. And I had learned to stop chasing echoes. I'd learned to speak in the present tense. I stayed in that third country, taught more, built more, wrote less, lived more. And every so often, I'd look out at the border and feel nothing. No longing, no bitterness, just peace. Because I hadn't been rescued, I had rescued myself. And I never needed to be found again. I lost everything. But I gained something rarer. The truth. And I've learned that some wars aren't about bombs or borders. They're about survival of the soul. I used to believe survival meant crawling out of something, getting back to where you started, reclaiming what was lost. But now I understand it means becoming someone who no longer needs those things. Survival is transformation. It's the slow, painful process of breaking open and choosing what to carry forward. I carried scars, but I also carried stories, laughter, connection, stillness. And those were heavier than any grief I'd once known. I no longer feared the dark. I had lived in it long enough to know its shape. And I no longer feared being alone because I had learned the difference between solitude and abandonment. I was never truly alone. Not once I learned how to stand. The man I became didn't chase validation. He didn't apologize for his existence. He didn't shrink to make others comfortable. He stood tall, even when he was tired. Even when the world didn't make space for him. He built his own. And invited others in. There were days I still woke up afraid. Triggers don't vanish, but they don't define me either. I knew who I was now. And I chose that knowledge over bitterness, over vengeance, over the easy path of rage. I wrote my story so others would know they're not alone. That betrayal doesn't have to be the end. That you can rise. That you can begin again even from nothing. Especially from nothing. Because when everything is stripped away, all that's left is truth. And truth is where real life begins. I didn't return to the world I lost. I created one, with my own hands, my own voice, my own rules. And in that world, I am not a victim. I am not a footnote. I am not a mistake someone walked away from. I am living proof that even the worst exile can become a rebirth. Even the deepest loss can become foundation. And even when someone tries to bury you, they may just end up planting you instead. I was left for dead, but I didn't die. I grew. And this is the man I became. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more shocking.